Okay, in that case, it gives me enormous pleasure. I'm currently talking to you from a Bazzite machine with a framework running Bluefin next to me. So I was very excited when, after DMing George, he was up for doing this. We'll get into this in the Q&A, but here at Workbrew, we obviously help people manage machines running Homebrew, and that tends to be Macs. And so when I saw George was essentially trying to, make Homebrew happen on Linux and make it not only a nicer experience but make it very much the core of the experience, I was very excited and wanted to bring him on to hear what that's all about. So without further ado, George, welcome to the webinar. Thank you so much for talking to us today.
Thank you for having me. Awesome. Do I just start?
Go ahead.
Okay, all right. Y'all see the slide? That's actually Bluefin. She's a dinosaur. That's and I'm George Castro. I've been an ops person for a long time. We'll talk about that. And today I'm going to talk about Homebrew and Linux, which I had no idea I would end up being an advocate for this, but this is about a 4-year journey. So we're going to talk about it, and then you can grill me on all the details. So I do like to talk about this stuff incessantly and forever. So feel free to, in chat there, tell me to get moving. When I started this project, I was actually on sabbatical. I'd crashed at a last startup and I needed time to recover, and I was looking for a passion project, the usual open source thing. And as it ends up, I ended up working at the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, which is part of Linux Foundation. And all of this just started to collide in a whole bunch of ways. And we're going to talk about that a little bit. So I've worked on Ubuntu Cloud and Server. If you recognize my face, you likely have had a broken Ubuntu computer and have ended up on askubuntu.com. Which I helped start in the early days of Stack Overflow. At some point during peak Stack Overflow days, it was the 3rd or 4th most trafficked Stack exchange in the world. Right above when Ubuntu did a release, we were more popular than Server Fault, which was very, very cool. I left Canonical after probably about a decade working on Ubuntu and linked up with the co-founders of Kubernetes in a startup called Heptio. And that got acquired by VMware. And that was my cloud native transformation, which I'm going to talk about a little bit because that mirrors what Homebrew has done. And I've done Kubeflow, which is AI and ML ops, and Cloud Custodian, which is a tool that deletes all the stuff you accidentally left running in Amazon to save you money and help you with security. I'm an Army vet. I've worked at education where managing fleets of Linux workstations at an engineering university. So I know about mass deployments and all that stuff. That becomes handy later on. And then that's where I ended up working those other stuff. I'm on the projects team at the CNCF, so I'm charged with the health and management of 220 open source projects, including Kubernetes and all the big ones you might have heard of, Prometheus, all that good stuff. It's fantastic stuff. So we're busy folks. It's a foundation that kind of prides itself on automation and doing lots of things very quickly. And it's just I have a dream job. It's great. I love heavy metal. Obviously, I love dinosaurs, and I'm a Linux enthusiast. So I'm here to actually talk about stuff. The kind of umbrella project that I'm working under is called Universal Blue. This is the name of the GitHub organization. It's like a loosely coupled set of individuals who are kind of working towards a similar goal, and that's doing container native operating systems, which you're like, what does that mean? So if you've heard of any of this stuff, you probably heard of Bazzite. This is a gaming image for handhelds, HTPCs, gaming laptops, computers. It's basically a productized version of Fedora. I'm using a project called Bootsy, which was recently donated to the CNCF earlier this year, which is strange because I was working there and helping to onboard it into the CNCF, which my passion project also consumed. So it became this kind of circular mash of like, I didn't know what was work and what was fun, but it's all good. So this project has been relatively successful when it comes to Linux clients. In fact, we recently crossed over 30,000 weekly devices. So these are anonymized devices that check in. And these numbers continue to go up and to the right. However, this Bootsy stuff that it's built on, it's kind of like making, actually it is just like making a standard Docker application container. There just happens to be a kernel and an entire operating system in it. So there's a bunch of people doing these. We're just one organization and we have images that we make. So let me go in a weird order here. Bluefin is what I'm going to be talking about today because that's my passion project. That's basically a developer workstation. Bazzite is the gaming one that I talked about. Aurora is basically Bluefin, but uses a different desktop called KDE instead of GNOME. That's Linux nerd talking there. And then Ucore is basically like a server style operating system whose purpose is only to run containers. So Ucore is similar to things like Flatcar Linux or Talos Linux, if you've heard of those kind of specialized container Linuxes. So all of us work together on base images, and we work together with our friends at Bootsy and Red Hat and Fedora to make all this happen. And we're about 4 years old, so things are going pretty good. And then I'm going to talk about the homebrew part in particular. All right. So this is what Bluefin looks like. I've worked on Ubuntu for a long time, and I was kind of been there so long. It was the early days when everyone thought, oh, it's a Linux desktop. It's this inevitability that's going to happen because of course. But then you find yourself in 2025. You're in a platform team, right? You have 7 coworkers. They're all on Macs, and you're the Linux nerd. So one of the things, especially I noticed in the CNCF, was the amount of Linux nerds and open source software that's just built on Macs, like Macs, open source, the packages available. It was just an overwhelming sense of like that clearly is the modern Linux or Unix that developers chose. And there was lots of things that they liked about that stuff. But I also love Linux as well. And Linux was always missing that extra kind of piece that made it appear in those things. Usually in my communities, in the professional communities, it's like, hey, it's my once a year time to try Linux, right? And then your coworker goes and they spend a whole weekend doing a thing, and then maybe they come back to their production Mac. So I wanted to build something that was actually said, you know what, I want to build something better for open source developers. Usually Linux distributions and products fall into a trap. It's like, oh, it doesn't do Photoshop. Well, I guess the thing's worthless, but it also runs a lot of containers on a lot of hardware very quickly. So as I watched for years, as I watched my Mac using friends and stuff using it, I was like, man, I'm doing all that stuff on Linux. I just need to figure it out. So the desktop is basically from Ubuntu. I copied it. I copied and pasted it basically. The desktop settings are put into a key value data store, just like they are in a Kubernetes cluster. So the desktop settings and things like that, I kind of made it look like Ubuntu, added Docker and a few of the things that people kind of expect. This application here in the top right is one I discovered. It's called Brew. It is a like little TUI that manages all your homebrew apps, and that kind of gives you that. I was like, look, I can even give you the traditional Linux packaging experience as well with homebrew. So that's what it looks like. It basically looks what people expect. I purposely market it as a second device for folks. Usually a lot of my coworkers and things like that, or people who run open source projects are like, look, I mainline my Mac, but I have a device that has a Linux laptop on it, and I love that it's like the same thing. And that's the value I'm going for. I'm not really going for, hey, everybody go out and replace your Macs in production today, because I have work to do as well. So why are we here? The reason I even discovered Homebrew was an option for me on Linux was an old blog post on when it had moved from Artifact bin, the old JFrog thing, bin tray, that was it, to OCI, which is the packages themselves are in ghcr.io, which I thought was incredible, because when you do a brew pull, it tells you just see the bottle coming from GitHub. This is important to me for a few reasons, kind of like when the light bulb went off, and it wasn't just me, it was with a bunch of us, was, hey, wait a minute, it's the same blob store we're using for everything else. It's just you just push things through a registry. That's where we keep everything. So wouldn't it be nice if I had that? But at the time, as a Linux user, I always heard, oh, Homebrew, isn't that the thing that compiles every time you do it? And there's like this weird stuff going on. But I installed it and I started to use it, and I said, this is perfect. It just pulls stuff from the registry. I wonder if I can observe the thing. Then what I really was impressed with was the automation in Homebrew to make all that happen. And I looked, I saw GitHub Actions. And as we were building this, I literally told people in our channels, open up the Homebrew merge queue in GitHub and just put it on a tablet or something and have it sit there while you're doing work. And you will see software, and you will discover software that is not going into Debian, it's not going into Ubuntu, and it's not going into Fedora. Everything is in there. And I was just blown away with how much stuff was in there. And And this really matched with us tech stack wise, because being built on Bootsy, we shoved the entire operating system into ghcr.io. That's really handy because now it gives us a centralized point for us to manage the stuff. Because the reason Bootsy and stuff is lighting up on the server side for organizations like Red Hat is managing, building containers and tags and all of that stuff is a thing that organizations know how to do because they're doing it to the application containers. Why not move the operating system into that same workflow? So I have OCI now being a crux point, and I have Homebrew and my operating systems. There are multiple on-prem projects that are enterprise grade and mature in the CNCF for you hosting your own. You can run a proxy at home, cache everything. You can run your own private ones. So that kind of solves a lot of these kind of Linux distribution problems that we struggled with in the early days in Canonical. Like we had to make PPAs, right? And you look at these things now and they're just so jank compared to just using Homebrew. So this worked out for me because open containers is great. I get to work on that stuff at work anyway. So there's an open standard. It's multi-vendor. It scratched that itch for me. And the entire stack, I can, with Bluefin, I'm basically effectively managing a fleet of deployments, right? And so that gives me the operating system part. And Homebrew gives me the application part, which is the command line stuff. So how's this different? Our way of doing Linux is different. We don't call them distributions. Bluefin is actually 3 distributions. It's Homebrew, Flatpack, and Fedora bundled into one. And then we say that we are an undistribution. We're more of I'm more the UPS guy. So we split a lot of the things in a traditional distribution. There's no package manager. You're not apt-get installing anything. When you get an update, you receive the equivalent of a huge Docker pull. And then you just reboot the image weekly or whatever, and then that gives you the system updates. And then Homebrew, we automate to just update twice a day. So this gives us a nice, clean, layered approach. So especially when people are new or learning Linux, it's like, look, you get the base image. You don't have to mess with that. All of your developer stuff goes in your user space anyway, and that's either with Homebrew or with containers. However, I found myself in a weird situation because modern Linuxes are kind of moving towards this universal packaging format with things like Flatpaks and the whole, where do traditional packages sit? Like when I started Bluefin, it was like, oh no, I wish I could get the Debian archive into it. But now I looked at huge archives like that are maintained manually, and I don't think I want that at all. Especially when you look at how automated things are. Brewer are doing. And meanwhile, at work, everyone's talking about 0 CVEs and getting software out to users as fast as possible. So this is kind of a new way to Linux. So I find myself in this weird situation where both Linux people and Mac people, both of them could say what it is that you're doing here, right? So like I find myself in that awkward middle, but then people started to use it. You see Aurora, Bluefin, and Bazzite here in the stats and stuff, and we started to grow. I know that the getting over 1% was important to get Homebrew to pay attention to us because I see maintainers talking about that, so that was useful. So we don't want to be in the packaging business. I don't want to be every Linux distro's talking about package managers and how they deliver software. I don't want to do any of that. I just want to give you a base operating system and let Homebrew do its thing. It's actually a feature for us, and then it's interesting to listen to distribution people who think that Homebrew is like this weird thing that you bolt on. However, there are millions and millions and millions of people. I don't know how many. Does anyone have a count? Enough that are saying, I have a Mac with Homebrew. This is perfect for me because I can use the same brew. Bring your brew file, and then that works. So, and everything we do, we try to help all other Linuxes because I don't want to make a distro, but if I can help make Homebrew better, it would work for us because I'm here for help. We have done some very unholy things to Homebrew. Let me apologize right away. We have to unlink systemd and dbus. We package it in an RPM and this thing that like nobody is just not awesome at all. And there's been a few drive-bys where people have seen things. They're like, this should be upstream and then bring it up there. So, there are some things that we're not happy with how we're doing. If you're running it on a Bluefin system, it does tell you that we are tier 2. because of this like symlink issue. And one of the reasons I'm here is more of a call to action for Linux users to be like, hey, look, Homebrew is telling us exactly what we need to get that S tier, that top support, but we have to do it. So the golden path for us is just to make Homebrew better on Linux for everybody. So at some point we made the decision to do this. We had been shipping what we call distro boxes, which are containers that have shells in them. And for a long time, we actually just shipped an Ubuntu image with Brew inside of it. And you would open the terminal and it would kind of take you in and it would trick you to think that you were in a host terminal, but you're actually in a container with Homebrew. So we tried different things. We tried doing that. We tried running it on the host, but we ran into path issues until we could fix it. But one of the issues is when you have an operating system without a package manager, people need software. So Linux people traditionally want apt and all that stuff. So I really wanted Homebrew to work. So throughout the course of the history of the project, sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't work. However, when we decided that it was the future for us, I think that was like the kind of watershed moment. And then everyone instead just focused on fixing the problem instead. We had issues where you would brew install something and PKS 11 or whatever that crypto library is would get pulled in. And then it was in the system path. And then a graphical application would try to run. And that would be the wrong version of the crypto library and it would break. So I would talk to friends at Flatpack. They're like, dude, you can't just go around setting the system path and expect the world to not explode. I was like, yeah, but oh man, there's got to be a way to make it work. Ultimately, we found the simple solution was only set the path when you open a terminal. And then that generally worked. And then we unlinked system D and dbus. Dbus is the thing in Linux that all the apps talk to each other. So there's some systemy things that we decouple Homebrew from. Is what really want to use it is I want to get the latest versions of everything. So we were stuck, but we finally figured it out. And we figured out our path forward was not to be a distro, Homebrew, an OS, and FlatHub. And this mix and match approach has been amazing for us. And then we shipped a new app store called Bazaar, which refreshed our Flatpack stuff. If you haven't heard of Flatpack and you're a Mac nerd, this is how we do our graphical apps in Linux. So that is an existing library, and they have another problem where people are trying to shove command line tools into Flatpak, and it wasn't designed for that. And I'm just saying, look, man, we just need to glue Flatpak and Brew together, and that's way better than any distro. And I know that, and I think I'm shipping that, but it's not quite there yet. That's the that's what I'm trying to say is it is a lot of duct tape. There are integration points, I think, between Flatpak and FlatHub. The team does not agree on this. I would love to have Flatpak integration in my brew file so it installs a cask instead. Some people think we should just be enabling casks. Some people think that we should just be going full Flatpak and then make the line more stronger, maybe with like an API thing or whatever you nerds always think about how things communicate. But there are definitely integration points there between all of the duct tape. So we have sort of working duct tape, but what we want to move toward is more working duct tape. We also do not have consensus on this, on how we want to approach. So it's one of those, we should probably ask brew people what they think. We started to experiment with our own tap. Things like fonts and wallpapers, if you put those on the image, it leads to problems. So we're actually moving. Brew is amazing for fonts, man. Like every font is in there and it just copies it to .local share fonts. Like that's it. It's a solved problem for me. And we're going to start shipping our wallpapers and things in there because once you're in the user space, you can be more dynamic, right? Like we can do a little wallpaper contest without having to change the image and things like that. IDEs continue to be a problem in this model because they were written for a world where they want access to everything. So what we do in Bluefin, when you turn on development mode, it reboots you into Visual Studio Code. And that's into an image that has Visual Studio Code on it. And that's kind of installed traditionally and on the image. So it has access to everything. However, we have to have a whole image just to put VS Code on it. And that kind of sucks because the images are quite large. They get up to like 11 gigs. And, these aren't chain guard containers. They take like 45 minutes to build. So for us, we started experimenting with like running a cask where we turn on the VS Code build in Homebrew and then just serve it. So that works. The guy who made it, Daedalus, PR'd it upstream and they were like, "This is pretty cool. Do it in a tap and let us know how it goes." So this is kind of where we're experimenting with taps, things like that. We don't plan on exposing this to users or anything like that, but kind of our place to mess with this kind of stuff, because it would be lovely if you could just tell one password to turn it on. Turn Linux on, everyone, and then have that work. So in conclusion, before we start talking, this is scratching an itch. It solves a real problem. Like, we have numbers that show that people are into it. That's, my question is the number big enough to get there? So I think when Joe reached out to me, that was kind of a milestone for me, where it's like, okay, people are starting to pay attention. I would like to figure out a way for us, and not just Bluefin and Universal Blue, but just Linux homebrew users in general, to kind of figure out how we are going to make this better for everyone. And as inspiration, there was a guy at FOSDEM, I saw the recorded talk about ARM on Homebrew, and they were talking about the enablement and stuff. And one day I woke up and it was just there. So because we do Linux on ARM for workstations, like Ampere makes some workstations. So Homebrew Linux on ARM, it feels like so niche of a niche of a niche, but man, once you get it up and running, you're like, I can't believe this works. But then you look at the automation and you're just turning on a bunch of little things. So for me, it feels more like it's a community exercise than it is whether a technical thing is possible or not. And with that, so I'm committed. I want to do a call for action. I'm going to keep talking about this. There's a talk I'm going to give at a conference some point about this, hopefully with one of y'all. There are some challenges though. Like Linux distributions, their whole entire shtick is like, hey, we're supposed to be the ones giving you software. And I'm saying, nope, no thanks. Those days are over. But I want to do it in a way that's conducive for brew. I don't want to be off in the woods doing things that homebrew maintainers don't like. So that's why I am here. And thank you. I am at KubeCon and Cloud Native Con in Atlanta next month, and Amsterdam in the spring. And you can always reach me. And that concludes my thing. That gives you a half hour to grill me now.
Yeah, absolutely. Don't go anywhere, anyone. Thank you so much, George. That was awesome. Hopefully that explained to everyone, what's going on, why you're thinking about it, and that tees us up for, as you said, the grilling. So just a reminder, if you have questions, please throw them into the chat, or I'll call on you and you can unmute and ask the question, or I'll read it for you, whatever you prefer. But whilst we're waiting for those questions to flow in, I do have some of my own, which I've been sitting on since I messaged you. So as one of the things, as I mentioned at the start, that obviously here we are working with lots of people who are in big companies, like our friends at Epic here in the attendee list, who have fleets, and we hear that Linux is traditionally a nightmare. Everyone is sudo. It's impossible to manage. People can install willy-nilly. So when I first installed, I've used Linux many times over the years, and I always inevitably get into the situation where I blow up my own distro through doing something silly. And so part of the whole, the container situation is part of what's really cool for me as a idiot for Bluefin. But it also occurred to me that seems ideal for enterprises with fleets, right? Like there's a bunch of spaces that people can't write to. There's a worst case you can roll back. You've got a fresh image. Is that true? Is that a thing? Do you agree? Like,
absolutely
what do you
true.
think? Perfect.
Awesome. Yeah. You can use the same change controls you do for like publishing your Docker containers or whatever. There's just an OS in there.
Yeah.
So you have full rollback capabilities. We keep 90 days of images in ghcr.io. That's the SLA for GitHub. But if you had a private registry, you can keep every artifact, every operating system you've ever published. We do things like we have NVIDIA branches of things that are managed separately. So literally, if you can think of the operating system as a Git tree, you can publish images alongside with that pattern. Yeah, and you can build locally. It runs on everything because you're just doing the equivalent of a Podman build or a Docker build. So any place with a container runtime, you can build the OS, which is cool.
Yeah, I mean, all the different images is a really interesting point as well, because I know, when you start to look into the different flavors of like Bluefin, for example, you've got the developer edition, you've now got the AI workstation edition coming up, etc. I guess that's also, it is thanks to Blue Build and the various tools, like it is quite easy to take one of these things and remix it, make your own image, right?
Oh, absolutely. There are millions of people with this skill. It looks like it says from Fedora base image. Right, and then copy my dinosaur wallpapers, DNF install Docker, add the Docker repo, DNF install Docker. It looks just like a fix me script that you
Right.
had. That's actually how it started, was a fix me script. Um, the difference is with Bootsy at the end, you get that stamp out that
Yeah.
image, and then you can tag it and label it everything you want. And existing tools work on them already. So you can run Gripe, which is that tool that scans for vulnerability. You can run
Hmm.
Sift and Gripe on them. Um, you can do all sorts of stuff, and you can go in there and look at the layers, and it looks just like a normal Docker container.
Fascinating. Yeah, I
Yeah.
can already imagine that being like, internal teams distributing like, their workspaces, particular image with different like set for different teams and ready,
Oh,
ready with all the
absolutely.
tools on day zero.
Yeah, because what you can do is you have a base image, and then the other one's from that image, and then you
Right.
could spider out however you want. And then what we do is you can have like a colon testing, colon latest, colon stable, colon LTS, however, whatever tag architecture you want to do,
Hmm.
you can do that. Mhm.
Awesome. And then to get into, so sorry, I know there is some terminology confusion here that I'm probably about to stumble right into. So on like the quote unquote immutability bit, when it
Yeah.
comes to the parts of the OS that like, in a typical Linux, so you can't install packages. There are things that you've that are written off. Does that realistically offer a more locked down experience? Like, does that offer any security for like an admin who's concerned about what an end user can do with their machine, or is it
Yes.
still okay?
Slash users read only. So
Yeah.
that's, there's benefits there, but mostly it's the management, because when you tie it into container signing and all of that stuff, and we're not
Hmm.
set up with, we're kind of consumer grade at this point.
Of course, yeah,
Uh, like
absolutely.
like you could check that with it's signed with cosign, but if you were in an enterprise environment, that would be, you would have it only applying, only pulling from a trusted registry, and there's a certificate there. You would have a custom image with whatever MDM agents you want on there. So
Mhm.
when, like, you can install Microsoft's what's it called? Not OneDrive, the MDM thing. They like, you
Oh,
usually
Intune,
can install
Intune.
those.
Works of Workbrew, by
Yeah.
the way.
You usually can install those, but what you would do is your company would have, it's the same people that make the golden image, right?
Right,
They
right,
would
right.
just slipstream that on. The benefit for me would be like, there's no way I can remove it. I can't even touch the disk.
Yeah.
Verity is coming next year at some point, I'm being told, which is the thing that verifies down to the bit and the hardware that the bits aren't flipping. There's a whole
Oh, cool.
Intune. Yeah, that
That's
was the thing I was trying to mention. Thank you.
satellite technology. What? Like,
Yeah, yeah.
wild.
Because the reason I chose this for Bluefin is I know banks and enterprises are going to buy this stuff, so I
Yeah,
kind of just get that stuff for free, um, by
very
just
cool.
consuming it. Yeah.
Before I continue down my list, chat, you're being too quiet. There we go. Question from Amber. Amber, do you want to come off? Do you want to come on mic and ask the question, or do you want me to read it out? I know you spoke at the beginning.
Oh,
So go
I
ahead.
could ask George. George, I think what I was trying to say here is like most people watching this are probably very experienced users with Homebrew or Linux or both.
Yeah.
But what if the folks, who are new to Linux, dipping their toes, into Homebrew? What's the on ramp with Bluefin? Like how are you going to make it feel like it's like that great first experience and
Yeah.
not like learning something new? But think about the days, the early Ubuntu days when people
Yep.
just were excited about it.
Yeah.
What do you see as the on ramp with Bluefin?
That's a good question. Amber and I built Ubuntu together, so that's a good
Nice.
question. Right now, when you open a terminal, it says, actually, what does it say exactly? It says, brew help, manage command line packages. Uh, what I have is you can run brew literally out of the box. There's no setup, so they don't have to go to the home page. You could just immediately install your git pull, install your brew files and things like that. That is kind of the main problem we were solving. The hard part for users, especially Linux users that are on ramping, is ignoring other Linux users. Like you go to a GitHub page to a project and you show you that table of all the packages they're in, and half are
Yeah.
Yeah.
red, and everyone thinks this is a good idea. I don't understand. Um, so what I say is like, look, I don't want to deal with any of that. Just go to the Mac section and follow the homebrew instructions. And for 95% of that stuff, that works. Especially in my field, we're cloud native, so it's usually like the command line tools that you need for Amazon's cloud, Google's cloud, and anything that ends in CTL, kubectl, all of these things, they're all in Brew and they're all very well maintained. So I've been actually telling people, new users, is like, you're going to see the Mac instructions, Homebrew, follow that. And then it's always sad because you go to the Linux tab and you click on it and it's a big if then else statement, right? And it just sucks, you know? So I can't fix there are 14 packages for Linux now. So I effectively just pick one. And I just pick one that happens to be, I feel very good and very competitive because of the automation that you see in the GitHub repo. Like I can't see how any distribution can compete with that level of automation, which is what I tell the hardcore Linux nerds who are like, why betrayal, right? I'm like, hey, look, man, the Linux open source Mac nerds are a huge community now. Like let's put them to work.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. But like it is difficult. A lot of this stuff is command line only. And, you know, like they're kind of experts to begin with. So I don't know how to kind of fix that.
Well, like, I mean, great question, Amber. Thank you so much. But like the minute you said it's just built into terminal, we've been monitoring, like, there's been this attack on Homebrew, which I'm sure you've seen, where like people are buying sponsored ads for Homebrew, so that you know, it's like, oh, install Homebrew and it takes you to a malware site and you download malware, right? And that's been popping up everywhere, and lots of people in like the Mac industry are like tracking it, and like, you know, Homebrew is at the project level has been trying to work with Google to deal with it. But the minute you're just like, hey, it's already there, you open your terminal, like you've already solved what is proving to be such a pernicious problem for like new Mac users. So it's a really great question. John, you can come up. You're coming off mic to ask that question. Don't be silly. That's not allowed.
Yeah, of course I can come off. I just want to get on the queue. So George, I just wanted to ask about so I'm like a moderately experienced Linux user. I ran Linux on my desktop for a long time. If I was to switch over to using Bluefin, what are the things that you think I would miss? And are there any of those kinds of things that you are specifically not planning to address, right? Like you're choosing to not implement or choosing not to have in the distro or the undistro, as you called it.
Yeah. So the great thing about Linux is you can do what you want. The awful thing about Linux is you can do whatever you want. I purposely, for Bluefin specifically, is a very focused use case because we want this to keep a hobby project, and it takes about 3 or 4 of us to maintain it, you know, so it's very low key. Where you get into trouble is for people who want to do exploration outside of the line. So if you want to, all of the Linux things that that my previous life used to do, messing around with a tiling window manager, ripping out Wayland, like, you know, I think I'll switch audio servers today and like all this other kind of stuff. What I am doing is basically calling bankruptcy on the old Linux model. And it's like, look, here's what you're going to get, right? And it's going to be a well-maintained kernel, a desktop, Homebrew, some apps, and a container runtime. Everything else, you're kind of on your own. So what this does is it allows for people to make custom images, which people do. So Bazzite is an example of this. It has a bunch of gamer stuff that you don't need. But the thing I'm going for with Bluefin is, can I give you a Linux for Mac people that is close enough? And even then, it's still very customizable. It's just a lot of Linux users are used to editing stuff in user directly instead of, you know, using the systemctl edit command, which will handle that for you. There's a lot of modern Linux isms that I'm trying to preach as a default as opposed to the old way of doing things. So things like if you find a random thing on GitHub that like really goes into deep stuff, I tell people that's going to be an Ubuntu machine. But for everything else, we do that stuff. Old things that like X11 apps, we don't support anymore. We just completely dropped all that support. So in a lot of ways, it was like, well, if this is a new way to Linux, if it's a reboot, let's just get rid of a bunch of old stuff that isn't going to be maintained anyway. So that's where I inserted Homebrew. There are people who complain that they can't do all that stuff, but they can also use a container. So you can fire up a container, terminal opens up, and Ubuntu's in there. You can apt-get update, and you can run those apps on your desktop. So if there's an old app for Ubuntu 18.04 that you need that only publishes a deb, and we have people who do this, you can run that container as a little terminal and then run the old app. And of course, virtualization and all that stuff all works. So I hope that answers your question.
Very cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
Just to briefly jump in on the point you made there, I feel like, you were talking about, if you want to explore and change your audio server and window manager and stuff, I feel like if you're at that level, you're also probably happy just like, getting into the container and building your own image on top of it, right? I linked to
Exactly.
Yeah. This
Some people
hilarious
just build
blog
it
post.
exactly how they want. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just I put dinosaurs in it and tried to market it. Like there are people who run really, really sophisticated custom images and you don't hear about it because it's just for them. But they publish them on GitHub anyway. So
perfect. Melta, sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. Do you want to jump on and ask your question?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Can you hear me? That's good.
Yes, we can. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, perfect. All right. Yeah, so I also started using Bluefin a few months ago, and I'm very happy with it privately. And then what I realized, what I do professionally is I am in a team which develops also a Linux distribution for embedded devices, so for controllers and edge devices. And then I realized, okay, most of the concepts are not too far away or quite similar in the sense immutable system, atomic updates, and also then really you have a boiled down, stable, robust system base, and then you add the flexibility with the containers on top of it and the virtualization, right? And now I wonder what your opinion is. What if we would add Homebrew to the mix? Because I think, on the desktop, it works really well. Any opinions on applicability on embedded devices?
So I know for sure that people are looking at Bootsy stuff for embedded. So for me, it's one of those, I try to say different, let's see, how do I say that? There was a clever way I said that, but I say like one language, multiple devices, one language. That's what I say, which is like the OCI container bit. So I honestly think that the pattern can go to embedded as well. And I think honestly, if you were to show up at the Bootsy channel on their Slack or whatever and to say, hey, I'm interested in this embedded stuff, they'll help you. Yeah. So that's good. I think that the things for Linux that I think should be fixed, like in the future, if I could snap my fingers, right? It's kind of make it a little bit more amenable to traditional Linux, the way it sits on the disk and things like that. Like, and it has that .linux brew directory, which like we just choose it by default. But if you connect an Active Directory user to a Linux machine, and then that user's ID is, 32,658, our homebrew system breaks, because we kind of assumed you're a single user system. And it's kind of set up for user 1000 or whatever. Those are the little things that you're going to find issues with, like doing things like that. But I think given Brew's ability to deliver software very, very quickly when upstream releases in an automated fashion, automatically makes it great for use cases like that, because I have embedded devices with really old stuff and no one's going to fix it. And it's sad.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Perfect.
I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. Thanks.
Awesome. Perfect. We've still got a bit of time left. Anyone else has any other questions or anything they want to jump in with?
Let me look here.
We've got a lot of chatter back and forth. Colin, thanks for sharing that experience. Yeah, I mean, I've seen George make this comparison a lot between Bluefin and Chrome OS, especially in terms of like, being able to reboot and things work. But I've definitely, I've very much had that similar experience. I've not been able to break it yet, which is usually my high watermark for me being trusted with a Linux for any amount of time.
Yeah. It's not unbreakable, but we definitely get rid of a lot of jank.
Yeah.
That, there's still people out there who develop against like the system Python on Ubuntu. Right. When they do an upgrade, they blame. This used to happen to me all the time. They're like, I upgraded it and now my Python app doesn't work. I was like, man, dude, why are you using the system Python? It's like, so things like that. And I should probably mention this is Brew's also a great gateway to other language ecosystems.
Yeah.
All the Python nerds love UV. Like I Brew installed UV and now my Python problems are solved like forever.
No,
and Brew gets me that.
You're missing a level. You Brew install Mies and then you Mies install UV. And then you're sorted.
Yeah. And there's another one called Pixie, which is also in Brew, and that's a package manager for the Conda community. So I always have a bridge there because there's always some data science nerd using, have you tried this thing? And I always want to go check it out. So yeah, it's ironic. I think I put this in my docs. It was like this when I got here, but Brew is also a great package manager for other package managers.
But you did touch on this briefly, but it does really solve that problem of like your distribution package manager is like distributing some old Python or whatever, right? And you go to compile something and you can't, because Brew with the rolling releases, you always are at least using what what is current. It really does just solve a lot of it removes just a lot of basic Stack Overflow questions, I think, that you run into.
Yeah. And then for us, I do notice this, like the few times we've been on Hacker News, when people mention this, they're like, well, what I don't like about Brew is that it's a rolling thing, right? And then you get people posting all of their stuff. Since we include a container runtime, you can always have, I've always strongly believed that the developer stuff should always be in the Git repo for that project. So I work with projects that already have Docker files with pinned versions of their Pythons and all that kind of stuff. So we kind of give people the flexibility of, you can go full homebrew, you can do containers. Dev containers is a pattern that we push, which is integrated into VS Code. It's like the slick thing.
In lieu of folks, you're going to have to ask questions because I am going to get to my list of technical support questions. But the first one, I wanted to follow up on a comment you made in Discord the other day, which I was like, okay, I need your manual, George. So as you mentioned, you've got DistroBox, and the main thing I find myself using DistroBox for is, I go and want to use Signal, and it only distributes on RPM. You said you haven't touched a DistroBox in months. What are your secrets? How? I feel like
use
I've got
Flatpack
3 or 4. Okay.
Yeah, the trick is sometimes people go and then they say they look at Linux, right? But it's just like this hot mess.
Right.
So what I do is I don't use apps that aren't Flatpaks. So I use the Signal Flatpak, which is unofficial, but you can verify it there on GitHub, things like that. I generally tell my users do a little checklist of the apps that you have.
Yeah.
And then see if you can get away with a Flatpak. What I am hoping for, given the people that are using this at work and who are in the industry, is how do we communicate to Signal that, Linux users want like an official thing? Because these RPMs and debs also give them root access to your computer. So I don't like that either. So, I need something sandbox or something in the user space that is at least decoupled from my system. The Signal Flatpak does give me some annoyances. There are times where I just switch to my phone for that one.
Yeah.
So there's the problem is, like, a lot of the Linux is a Wild West and nobody says anything. So it just remains a Wild West, right? Where I think what I'm trying to do, be like, well, there's at least a section of Linux users that are like, look, we work in the industry and it's got to look like this, like it's, I need to have the latest versions of things. It's got to be this way. And hopefully to add social, I don't want to say social pressure, but, show that there's a demand for a modern Signal that I can run on my computer via these things. And we have to improve Flatpak and other things as well, which we're helping to do. So.
Awesome.
So
John,
I had another question I wanted to jump in with, George, is so you mentioned, the users of Bluefin are like kind of going up pretty steadily. What do you know about the users of Bluefin? Like, do you know what kinds of people they are, what kind of use cases they have? This kind of strikes me as something that I could see like home libraries being really into. I don't know if you've seen any of these like projects on GitHub that are like awesome list of 5,000 containers you want to run at home for whatever reason, and they have like a website where you can download a curl to bash script to run. Like, who uses this stuff, and like what do you see?
Yeah, so I survey my users, and I surveyed for about 4 years. But the ideal user I went for was so first of all, the Chromebook thing, you could just that's a use case you can give it to, but that's not what I need right now. I need developers to help build the other thing. So I'm focusing on specifically cloud native developers, and that's like Kubernetes nerds, because I access them at KubeCon. So I interviewed folks who were like the Kubernetes team at Google, all of my ex-Canonical folks, people at ChainGuard, people at Red Hat, obviously, and all these kind of companies that we hang out at KubeCon. And I was like, what would you want in a Linux? And a lot of them, and I also survey my users regularly, but Homebrew always comes up as one of the top 3 things that people mention. Usually I'm looking for, it's cloud native nerds. It's like the Kubernetes team at work where they're all Macs and there's a Linux nerd. It might be someone who is looking for Ubuntu but wants to be a bit more leading edge. So we do things like convenience commands to install the latest AI tools, stuff like that. And we get all those from home. It's just running a brew bundle command for them. But I could call that I could call that Bluefin AI edition, right? So a lot of it is just picking defaults that people want, but also not. The lesson I learned from working on Ubuntu is not making a distro. So like we're not. It's very lightweight. It's more maintaining a container than it is a distribution. Most of my users are pros. I've got maintainers of Helm, ship Helm from a Bluefin machine. So it's usually like a lot of folks, it's their second machine. Usually a lot of times work gives them their Mac, and then they have their favorite Linux laptop, or then they have a lab. The second half of the community we're getting is a lot of these Linux nerds that are in the desktop are also new to cloud native. So for them, they have no idea what all these containers are. So we're like, hey, check out linuxserver.io. Here's how you get your home lab going. So it is a lot of container nerds. The last survey we got is 9.5 million cloud native developers in the world in March. And I have access to the draft numbers for the fall, and they are higher, but we won't announce those until KubeCon. But it's definitely a huge growing market. I'm going after ops teams, the kind of people that have to do this at work, because that's kind of our mantra is get work done, and we don't appeal to the typical Arch Linux user. So like we're kind of super focused on that user stuff. That helps me because a lot of the contributors are coming in do Kubernetes during the day work stuff. So it's like, oh, now you're writing my GitHub Actions for me. Thank you. So I hope, the idea there is these folks generate these things, and then out of this, you can get a thing that you could put on a friend's computer and never have to touch it again. And then we have a little web UI thing that you can enable, that you can connect to that remote machine. So if you have your parents or something, add them to your Tailscale and remotely administer it if you want, but we try not to make you do that. Does that help?
I mean, I think that use case of people who want to get more into the cloud native development flow, and it's like not necessarily the most approachable thing to just pick up.
Right.
I actually see that as like a huge area, like growth trajectory for you. If you have kind of the carrot, which is I want to be good at this thing.
Yeah.
If you give them the easy on ramp to that seems very valuable.
Yeah. Yeah. And it totally helps. Like I sit in the middle of the project pavilion and I say, all of these apps right here, you can get all of these on Homebrew. You get that on Homebrew
this on my second Mac as soon as this ends. So.
Yeah. You say, look, you could get you're going to deploy the container of that thing, and the control tool for that thing, you're going to brew install on your machine, and then you should be good to go. But we've been at it about 3 years. It's slow, steady growth. I think, I'm very realistic about a Linux desktop. So, it gives us a place to play, but there is cool things because there are advantages when you get a local cluster up and running compared to a Mac. Obviously, I get shredded on battery life, but it's also nice that you can do all of this on your Bazzite machine and play Borderlands 4 that night. And it's an amazing experience, So that it kind of it's that weird advantage where you have Windows, Mac, and then Linux can do the games and the development stuff. There's like this weird Venn diagram, and then we just kind of communicate that it's a cross-platform world. Use cross-platform tools, and that's going to be a container and Homebrew. That I feel like that ties in a message where the OS isn't such a big deal as much, because what we want is for people to spend their time with their apps and Homebrew and getting their work done, and not Linux anxiety bothers me, and that's what I'm trying to get rid of.
Yeah, I think the Windows users is like a huge one. I said this in chat as well, but like I think another big portion of users that I don't think you mentioned is like, this was end of life for Windows 10 this year. It was also the some interesting choices in Windows 11 land. And like I've seen loads of people who've just had enough, and they're like, I do all my dev in Windows not PowerShell, sorry, in Windows subsystem for Linux anyway.
Right.
I'm only on Windows because I also play games.
Right.
Bazzite's perfect, right? Or like, I've got a framework, and you've got you're a higher support tier on framework, so Bluefin's perfect. So many like devs who have been tied to Windows for whatever reason, but are basically doing their full development already in a Linux container, can just make that instantly.
Yeah. WSL is such a gateway, because it's like, if you use that thing, you're kind of forced to use containers and all that stuff and push to Git. It's all GitOps.
Yeah.
Right. And then your Mac is the same way. Why is Linux always different? That's the thing that bothered me. It's like, why do we always have to be the different one?
Yeah.
But ironically, these Mac people are also pushing to live clusters and stuff, and they are the Linux experts. They just don't use Linux desktops. So, that was kind of the carrot. I was like, I wonder if I can do this. That was the initial thing.
Yeah, and John's point about being like an on-ramp for cloud natives. I'd never used a dev container because I often have this reaction of being like, oh, yet another YAML config I need to learn. But then now I'm using dev containers because it's it's like right here, and it was a cool way to develop on the the OS I'm using. And like now I'm like, oh, this is awesome. I've been missing out. And then I noticed projects have got dev containers now, and it's like, that's really cool. Before Joe leaves, Joe asked, do you have a link with instructions for that remote support use case?
No, you turn on SSH on the machine, and there's a Flatpack called Cockpit. You install that, and then it says SSH to this machine, and you either tailscale it or not, up to you. Cool. And then it gives you a little web UI. It gives you a little performance meters. There's a web terminal, so you can type stuff. There's little meters that show you how much disk space and storage is on there. There is a lot of work to do in that kind of Chromebook killer, because sure, I got the reliability part, but Chromebooks are good because of the management piece, right? And that's why, that's where I see Workbrew, and it's like, aha, you probably have something like that. I want in.
100%. All right, we've got 3 minutes to go. We've got time for one more question. Who wants the honor? Anyone? Jump in chat. Otherwise, whilst I'm waiting for that, just a couple of bits of preamble. Once again, thank you, George. It's been wonderful. The recording for this will be right where you signed up. So on the Workbrew webinars page, if you just go to that same link you signed up on, you'll be able to get the recording. We will also be sending this video to George, because I believe George has motives for it. So I'm sure that will end up somewhere on one of George's channels. Otherwise, George, where can people find you? Where can people learn more?
Projectbluefin.io is where I'm at, or just if you just Google Universal Blue, we're around. You might see us everywhere. It's pretty easy to find Bazzite these days. Bazzite.gg, and getaurora.dev is the other one.
Okay, we've got one last question from Shai. With the gaming folks being really noisy, how much has Bazzite ended up influencing what you have all been doing?
Gaming nerds, man. They bring the numbers, but they come with use cases. It's like, please, kid, do not. I've been working all summer to get this handheld, and it's the only one my parents let me get. I was like, please, do not break your computer. So like, it's very interesting. I think we take a different ops based approach. Like we're more conservative in our kernel updates and things like that, because they have to add all this gamer stuff to make the stuff work. But generally speaking, we're all headed in the right direction. And
yeah, I mean, I have Linux using friends who have literally sold their NVIDIA GPU and bought an AMD one because of how horrible it is, and I'm on NVIDIA GPU on Bazzite and have experienced no issues. So the weird hardware stuff you've added is working great.
Easter egg. So we had the thing up and running, and it was working, and everyone loved it. And then the day someone figured out NVIDIA, having worked at Canonical on NVIDIA, like Linux, NVIDIA has been the thing. And the day I saw that machine boot, I was like, oh my goodness, we're onto something. That's when I decided to make it a real project and not a thing, because I knew someone would dig it.
Awesome.
So
perfect. Well, thank you very much for seeing us off for that last question, Shai. And I think we'll close it there.